open this meeting. Evening, John. It's 7 o'clock on May 3rd, 2023. It's a meeting of the Water Resource Protection Task Force under the auspices of the Select Board of Manchester. And we'll open with a congratulations to Chuck on the birth of his second child. The only thing I know about this child is that its nickname is JJ.
Yeah, Jace Jonathan Dam, born on, let's see, that'd be the 21st.
And that would be an XX chromosome or an XY?
Baby boy, yep.
Okay. Oh, that's a two for two.
Yeah.
Wow.
Goes along with Otis.
Yep.
That's who it is. Otis. They have great names. Jason, Otis.
Yeah, definitely not something that you hear very often.
Yep. Still waiting for somebody to name their child Tuberculate. Still a favorite word. Not a great name. All right. So welcome. Announcements. I have none. They'll all emerge in the course of the agenda. Does anyone else have anything to announce up front? Okay, we are operating without Sue Croft tonight, and also without Scott Horsley. He's found other things to keep himself busy, and he has submitted his final report on protection zones, recommendations, and groundwater and whatnot. And our first agenda item is to review the recommendations with an emphasis on recommended water rate changes. And I thought a way to do that would be to give you a quick report on the update to the select board I gave last week, because it pertained to the first set of recommendations we made. I'm going to share my screen here, assuming I can find the right document. That's not it. Talk among yourselves for a moment here. Here we go. So as you remember, I took a set of recommendations on which we'd voted here in our April meeting to the select board on April 18. And you remember the first one was about how to keep the momentum and do implementation around the recommendations we're going to make. And our specific recommendation there was to create a water advisory board with 3 members appointed by select board, giving advice to the select board. And that was not greeted with, it was not well received. The select board, as probably most of you know, is in the midst of a governance project, the impetus of which is to streamline government, fewer committees, fewer boards and commissions, clearer lines of responsibility. So while I thought something as critical as drinking water might be an exception to the rule that we have too many boards, that was not their preference. So they talked about various organizational solutions, didn't really settle on one, but I know there's been some work since then on making this effort part of the sustainability committee, which up till now has focused on compost solutions and rain barrels and such, and its possibility. I then gave them the 9 policy recommendations, or the headings for the 9 policy recommendations, and I would say that there was not they didn't really engage on these first because they felt it was too much to process without a lot more preparation. And I had, in fact, sent this list over only the day before, which meant it didn't get to people until the day of the meeting. And I guess there was a general sense that most of these items are already underway with pretty clear responsibilities for DPW or Board of Health or Planning Board. And I didn't push back a great deal on that point, although I disagree pretty strongly because I took them at their word that they weren't prepared to make any decision until they had a chance to process this. So the upshot really was that we decided I would come back maybe with one or two of you at their mid-May meeting, which is May 15, 10 days or so hence, and reprise the discussion of these 9 and drill into number 2, which is the water rates, which brings us to what I want to share with you and get your reactions to tonight, detailed recommendations for changing water rates. Before I do that, any questions, comments, John, anything you wanted to add from being there, or anybody else who was at the April 18 meeting?
Yeah, Steve, I just might add that the select board, I think, is pretty receptive to having our water board, or at least our water board function, consolidated within the sustainability committee. And I think it's something that we will pursue in earnest at the next meeting for more detailed discussion. But the sustainability committee right now is down 2 people, which means we can stack that committee with water people.
It's true, and
And
they've had some trouble staffing up over the past year, so they're
Yes.
grateful to be at a quorum finally.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Steve spoke with Allison, and I did. In fact, the 3 of us chatted briefly a number of days or so ago. Well, not briefly. It was during a walk.
Yeah, we took a walk around
And
Gravelly.
That's correct. And she's quite interested in that particular direction, to add another thing on the sustainability plate. So I think that it may be that we'll add a couple of folks that will be, quote, water folks, unquote. I suspect that those folks might come from, indeed, this committee, and maybe there'll be someone else from sustainability, but 2 or 3 people that will continue to focus on the recommendations that are coming out of this task force and carry them forward for the indefinite future. And I think if you look at the numbers that are up here that Steve has, numbers 1 through 9, that committee would be dealing with number 2, which we're going to discuss in a little bit more detail right now, and number 3. Those are the 2 areas I think they'll probably be spending much of their time. I think the select board generally felt that numbers 1 and 4 and 5 and 6, etc. Those generally are DPW activities, and Chuck and Nate have their arms around those activities pretty well, and we wouldn't argue that necessarily. So I think that's where we're going with regard to the top recommendation with regard to a water board. It'll be consolidated within sustainability.
Thanks, John. That's helpful. And I would only add that, you know, as an objective observer, which I am no longer, but if I were, kind of look at the town and say, you know, if it were true that all these things were underway and well under control, A, we wouldn't have needed a water resources task force, and B, we'd be way ahead on a variety of these with some long-term plans in place and metrics. And it's that absence that led us to start this thing in the first place. And I don't think anything's changed other than the task force in terms of new resources, new budget, new talent on the playing field for these things. So I'm a little less optimistic than you are about them getting done without a lot of nudging, pushing, recommending, and even some squawking. But be that as it may, we'll know more on the 15th, and anybody who wants to come along and lend a hand, just let me know.
I have a question.
Yeah, Jeff.
Chuck isn't here, but maybe Nate can kind of address it. when we say the majority of these are under the DPW and Chuck and Nate, is a separate committee dealing with, if a separate committee deals with things, is that a burden or does that take the load off of Chuck and Nate?
Question.
I'd say it can go both ways. I will say we do have like, one is in progress in some form. We're having those conversations. 4 is well underway. We have consultant, agreements going. 8, 9 are definitely, things that are on our agenda that we've been doing. Yeah, some things it can certainly help with.
Yeah, so those specific ones that you mentioned, again, does a separate task force help those go along faster? Or are we just burdening you, pushing you with more work on those specific things? It's not clear to me, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I would say those are, majority wise funding driven. We can always, if the budget for consultants and the budget for construction is in place, then, adding those tasks on to, we have consultants already established for all of these tasks, that are working on, we've been doing the water main replacements. So doing, whether we do $1 million project or a $2 million project, in terms of design and management isn't a whole lot different. It's just the length of construction during the summer season. For the recycled water system at the wastewater plant, that's currently, we're doing the basis of design with our consultant, which will lead to an RFP where we go out for preliminary design. And that's just one, task that's going to be incorporated into that overall, project there. If we want to separate it out ahead of time, that is something that the consultant can look at and develop plans to put out separately. Doing that, we're certainly not going to get the economy of, having a larger project. And I think that's kind of, when we do smaller projects, you're still going through all the same, steps that you do for larger projects to a lot of the extent. It's just kind of construction duration really, and the overall cost of the project. The number 4, defining next steps for Lincoln Street, we're doing, we've done the study, the initial study there, and we're working on furthering that study, looking at bringing it up to Gravelly Pond. So that's underway. And then the water meter replacement is just a matter of really defining what we want for a project, when we want it, but putting together an RFP is something that a consultant can do pretty easily. And then it's a matter of, receiving bids and implementing a the program.
Right. So it sounds to me like between the DPW and the Board of Selectmen, or the Select Board, you guys submit what you want and it gets approved financially or not, and then you move forward with it. So I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the, number, 2 is something that we could certainly, use a committee for in terms of, where do we want to go with the rates? How aggressive do you want to be with them? That's something that would be good for, a committee to help weigh in on. But, I think we've already taken the steps of talking to Reftilis about it and them doing, a model on it. So, we have that, those steps have been started to be taken during this committee. Increased water conservation awareness, that's a great thing for a committee to do, getting out to the public. There's only so much that, DPW can put out that people listen to. Updating source water protections, I think that's another great task for a committee to help on getting the awareness out. and then the dialogue with, the other watersheds, some of that's at the DPW level, but also a lot of it's at, more the select board level. And then, if you have committees that have cross connection, if our committees can reach out to committees in the other towns, that I think that would certainly help.
Thanks.
Peter?
Yes, I'd like to just suggest that the DPW can certainly put in requests for all the funding they want, but their ability to influence the decision is limited, as opposed to 50 citizens going to a meeting pushing the issue. So maybe it doesn't have to be an official committee, but if you go to the select board or the finance committee and they know that there's a significant number of people that want to support the DPW and want that funding, I think you have a better chance than having Nate and Chuck try to do it by themselves, push by themselves.
It's a really good point. I confess that one of my reactions when select board members pushed back and said, all of this is underway except perhaps 3 and 4, was what we really need here is a lobby, like a lobbyist, but a public interest lobbyist. We're not going to help engineer 8 or 9 or work with consultants, but you're right about the groundswell of support for what's required, which is capital. David, you had something?
Yes, just elaborating on what you just said and Peter just said. For that reason, I think it might make sense to tie number 1 and number 2 together. The water meter replacement upgrade is a capital project, and in order to get that through the finance committee approval and town voter approval, it seems to me that if it could be justified with a change in the water rates, let's say an increase in the water rate collection, we could justify the capital expenditure. What do you more experienced town halls think about that idea?
Good question. Tom, are you answering that or something else?
No, I was just going to comment that I think what the Water Resource Protection Task Force has done has looked at all kinds of ways that the water resources can be protected. And these are the 9 ideas that we've come up with. And I believe some of them were, for example, number 9, we know that, with the town has been voting to replace water mains. But some of these things would not have been on anyone's radar screen if it wasn't for this particular group. And just, I think that the select board might be missing that. John Round, if I can ask you, the select board was not thinking about going back to water and sewer commissioners, are they?
No, they're not. They're not. That's when you say go back, what do you, I mean, they are our water and sewer commissioners right now.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean with them handling the main task.
I would say that it will still be an approval that will have to go through that, but I think the task of looking at numbers, and we're talking rates, because really that's what the select board does. It doesn't do much more than look at rates that are provided for by that are provided each year by the DPW, and really in past years it's just, all right, let's add 2 or 3% and let's go. I think that's going to change, as we will have a discussion shortly with regard to this. And to David's comment a little bit earlier, yeah, the water meter information is going to affect the rates, and what we learn from that, it will affect the rates going forward as to what we decide to do. How these water meters are going to get paid for is not a discussion we've had yet. It could come out of rates. We don't know how that's going to work out, but I mean, we could change pricing here and consumption doesn't change, but our revenue goes up. Or we could take that out of funds somewhere else. That discussion has not been held, or maybe it'll be a combination of the two. I don't know, but we do have to decide how that's going to be handled, and that's, what is that, Steve? That's about a $1.5 million. It's over $1 million.
Yeah, well, John and I just realized there's another 300 meters we weren't counting. 'Cause
Oh,
there are
yeah.
300 households that have a second meter called a deductimeter. Those have to be replaced too.
Yeah.
And just a piece of history, which I think Helen, you reminded me of, which is about the time that the Horsley-Witten study was done and a water protection committee was formed for the first time. There was a public committee that supported DPW. I don't know exactly what it was called. Some of you with really good memories may know this, but apparently it also was retired or kind of petered out, as the Water Protection Resource Protection Committee did in the early 90s.
Yeah, they had a DPW committee of 5 people,
Right.
chair, vice chair, and to work with the DPW and advise them on things. So, yeah, so that was everything from that all the areas are the branches of the DPW, plus now the outside contractors do. And that was elected probably for 15 plus years, but it hasn't been
Hasn't been revived.
it was dissolved, and I would say back before 2000.
Yeah, it looked like it was actually the early 90s that it stopped publishing minutes and other things like that. Well, this is all great appetizer for taking you through these recommendations, but let me give Helen the microphone before I do that. Helen? Helen, you're on, but we can't hear you. You're not muted, so I'm not sure why we can't hear you. Well, I'm sorry. Just see what you can, maybe John can tinker with a setting there and let us hear your voice and your always useful opinions.
Well, I'm sorry.
There you are.
I have to see, I'm watching it on a big screen as well as on a small computer. That gets in the way. Back in 1990, we got town meeting support for a committee, but also that's when the watershed districts were overlaid district was established. I worked with Scott Horsley on that. Well, the problem was that in the early 1990s, the state decided that elected DPW boards should not continue. I think they were trying to make it more professional, that the engineer would be in charge. Because we used to have an elected DPW board that had a word to say about everything. And it was more than the engineer could handle, I think. I mean, what streets got plowed first, second, and third, that kind of thing. At any rate, they knocked off this committee. They just made it go, all committees, the elected board out. And that took the water resource board with it. Nobody found another pigeonhole to put it in too.
I see.
It could well have gone under the Conservation Commission. It really had no authority. Do you know what I mean? It just studied things.
Right.
And
Yeah, we sympathize.
right. So
Always useful. The history lessons are really useful. Thanks, Helen. So back to the water rates. You'll remember that this is what I showed the select board, that one of the primary objectives, maybe the most important objective of water rates, ought to be conservation, in addition to covering operational costs and other things. And with that in mind, here's where we are today. Every year, around the end of the fiscal year, the select board meets as the water and sewer commissioners and proposes new rates. So a year ago, almost a year ago, they proposed, 15.55 per 100 cubic feet, 3% increase for sewer, and then 3% increase across the board for 6 tiers of water use. And in truth, there's not very many people in the first or the 6th tier. I think a total of less than 10 households in both those tiers. So it's really concentrated in these 4 tiers. And the span between $6, $6.66 and $8.59 per 100 cubic feet is, maybe 25%, 30%. So here are the current rates in dollars per 100 cubic feet. Here are the tiers in, this is actually in cubic feet per quarter, not 100 cubic feet. And I said, we're after 4 things. One is to encourage conservation by all households. That's going to require a focus on a small fraction that use the most drinking water in the summer. Second, let's try to recover the full costs of supplying plentiful, clean drinking water to the town. That includes the cost of protecting the water sources, remediating dangerous contaminants, as well as operating the distribution and treatment system, which is the DPW Water Division. So there's more at stake if you think of full cost. Third, allow time for adjustment, for ramping up conservation initiatives, and frankly, for installing new water meters, so we phase in the rate changes. And fourth, at all costs, avoid any reduction in the total annual water division revenues. Because while we have a little surplus carried over from previous years, the purpose of an enterprise fund is to cover the properly defined costs. And as Nate said, we're working off a model. It's a homegrown model, but I think it's relatively sophisticated. It's still awaiting full vetting by Raftellus. So here's the recommendations that a few of us came up with. We've been back and forth on these. And this is sort of the end point. So this is not a change that would happen next month. But what it shows is that we changed the tiers. You think the 4 tiers are kind of 2, 3, 4, and 5 that are the main ones for the current system. We're going to not follow those exactly, but not far off. So below 1,900 cubic feet per quarter, the rate will be lower, less than half of the current rate. Next tier, the rate will be higher, almost twice the current rate. Next tier up to 16,000 cubic feet per quarter, the rate will be up a factor of 4 and a little bit. And at the top, the highest tier, the rate will go up 6 times.
And that's like taxes, right? I mean, you don't pay for more. You only pay for the amount you're over the tier at that higher rate, right?
Correct. So if you're using 5,000 cubic feet in a quarter, your first 1,900 are at $3. Your next 2,100 are at $13, and your final 1,000 are at $32. Okay. So this is dramatic. It's not without precedent in New England, but it's unusual. Usually smaller steps are taken. That's one reason we thought about it's important to do this in phases. So here's an example of phases. This would be the first one, the beginning of this fiscal year. This tier would be $5, which essentially is lower than these current rates for an equivalent, roughly equivalent tier. This tier would be $8, $15, $20, and they would work their way up, or in the case of the first tier, down to the endpoints in the beginning of fiscal 2024. So essentially, we're saying reduce from 4 tiers to 6, from 6 to 4, although in truth, we really only have 4 practical tiers today. But importantly, significantly increase the differentials in rate between the lower and the higher tiers, and implement it gradually. Let me show you some of the effects of this, at least to the extent we can model them. Because you're probably wondering, what would this do to my bill? What would this do to my neighbor's bill?
Yeah, yeah.
The first thing I did was change this into gallons, because I don't know about you, but 100 cubic feet is not an intuitive amount of water to me. Whereas a gallon, I know what a gallon is, right? I can put it in the fridge. And I know that if I go to Walmart and I buy Poland Spring at the cheapest price in like the 24 ounces, I'm paying about $5 per gallon of water. $5 per gallon. Just keep that number in mind. The bubbler in our office, that's about $1.25 or $1.50 a gallon. So that's the range for purchased clean water. What do we charge? Our current rate is round about 1/2 cent, going up to 2/3 cent per gallon. So the lowest tier is just under 1/2 cent. There's 1/2 cent. 0.55 hundredths, 0.59 hundredths, up to 0.69 hundredths of a cent. That's a good deal. And you can begin to understand why, even without advertising and a lot of marketing overhead, bottled water is such a profit maker for Coke, Pepsi, Nestle, etc. That separate subject from tonight. So this is the same chart converted into gallons per quarter. And it's kind of interesting to look at because 14,000 gallons was set because it's a little bit below the state recommended maximum of 65 gallons per capita per day. So if you translate a household of 2.5 people into that, you get 14,000 gallons a quarter. So these are the virtuous people in tier 1. They're living, average over the year within the state recommended maximum drinking water consumption per person. And of course, there'll be exceptions for bigger families, multi-family units, things like that. But you got this in gallons. So we're moving from 1/2 cent to a world in which this tier will pay 1/5 cent. This tier up here will pay 3.5 cents, 2.5 cents, just under a penny.
That's a marketing opportunity for clean water and how, and cleaning PFAS and everything else that we do, everything else that Chuck and Nate do.
Yeah. By the way, just in case you ask, there is no guarantee from Nestle or Coke or Pepsi for Dasani or Aquafina that there are no PFAS in their water.
Right.
Just Atlanta tap water.
Right. And then that's the problem is that Pepsi sources it. And so Poland Spring and Nestle source it from a large variety of wells and other sources. I think Coke is the only one that takes public water supply water and treats it. So it's as good as the public water supply water plus whatever they're doing to it. Anyway, more than you need to know.
It's
So
worse.
one question is,
It's
Peter?
worse than that. The process to make sparkling water prevents them from taking the PFAS out. So if you're drinking
Nice.
sparkling water, you are guaranteed to be drinking PFAS.
so we should just cut out, drop gin and tonics completely this summer.
Well, you better have flat water. Don't have the sparkling water.
Jessica?
I just want to be careful of using words like virtuous. I think we could say it's something we want to be shooting for or whatever, but different people have different things going on, and obviously, I don't know what the word I want is yet, but I just think we need to be careful using words like virtuous about where we want these folks to be. Little picky point. Little picky point.
Yep, trigger words are important. And I'm usually oblivious to them, so I appreciate that.
Steve, I have a question.
You could call them savers for all,
Yeah, conservers,
Yeah.
conservers. Because what they're basically doing is they're not using much water outdoors. they're washing their car occasionally, they're watering a vegetable garden by hand. They are not, irrigating a significant amount of property. And indoors, they're being sensible. It doesn't take much to get below 65 gallons per capita per day in terms of the length of your shower, not running small dishwasher or washer loads, all that other stuff.
Right. I like conservers much better. I just think we want to be careful about sticking value judgments and words.
We won't call it the good guys and the bad guys. Absolutely not. I guess I was a little wrong here. There are actually 460 households here. It's in tier 6 that we have almost none. So correct that. But, out of almost 2,000 households, you've got over 1,000 of them in tier 1 and 2, another almost 700 in tier 3. So you got just a dribble up here, about 150 to 200 houses in tiers 4, 5, and 6 in the current system. What that would translate into in this new system is, again, about 1,100, about this same population is going to be here. The conservers, so to speak. About 500 will fall here, 260 here, and about 60 households here. When the rates are full, these people will be paying 129, which is less than either of these rates, considerably less than this one, for this 1,100 people. These guys about $1,400, which is an increase, but not a huge one. Most of them were in tier 3. These folks will see significant increases. This about 50% over tier 4, or about the same as 5. This one more than any of the existing tiers. And the phasing will take us up there. And, frankly, give people in this zone, time to adjust, assess their options, ask for help, figure out if they have a potential to have a private well, other kinds of things.
Steve, this is Peter. I agree with the rates. I agree with the 4 different categories of, and I agree with raising the rates. I guess my question is, the water is so inexpensive to begin with. The financial impact for most of the people is going to be very minor, and for the big users, they probably are not so much concerned about finances anyway. I know my water bill goes up $20 in the summer, big deal. That's a couple of Starbucks coffees. But the sewer bill goes up $100. Is there a way to tie it into the sewer bill somehow? Even though that water isn't going to the sewer, it's free money for the sewer. Is there a way to tie it into the sewer rate so the impact is more financially?
A great question. Here's a couple of elements of it. One is that most of the people at the end of the spectrum here, the 200 here, the 60 here, are not on town sewer. So they don't feel that pinch. As one of them said to me, all of this is pretty irrelevant next to the property taxes, because they're not paying sewer. So that, even if they're getting a $10,000 water bill for the summer, they're not getting another $25,000 or $30,000 of sewer tacked on that. The second thing is that 320 households have deduct meters, and that would, of course, only be people who are on town sewer. Nobody else. If you're on septic, you don't need one. And that means they can use water and pay only for the water, not the sewer surcharge. So, in the spirit of asking everyone to be more conservation minded in the summer, one of the things we could look at is changing the rates for deduct meters, because deduct meters operate as though they are another account. And, if you keep them, so they don't include whatever you're using indoors for your house. It's not a household total. It's a meter by meter total. So they're actually, in my mind, a very good deal for someone who has, a medium-sized lawn, wants to water it heavily, a vegetable garden, and swimming pool. you know, not an estate property, but enough to require it. And I know a number of you folks have deduct meters, and no sin in that. It's the logical thing to do. But if we want to have conservation fall not just on the, 100 to 200 people at the heaviest use end, we would make a change in deduct meter fees. In some other towns, they've actually, when they go for conservation, they have pushed the deduct meter fee up to a higher tier automatically. So no matter what you use in your deduct meter, you're paying the third tier or the fourth tier rates. And that, gives people reason to think about being cautious. David?
Steve? Comment?
Yep, go ahead.
So Steve, I understand what we're trying to do here, but I think this looks really radical to me. And a little more than a year's time, we're talking about the vast majority of water users in town paying over 400% increase in water rates. I think there's going to be a huge amount of pushback.
I think
with
you're
these
misreading it,
rate
David. We've got
increases.
1,170, 60% of the users here paying between 150 and 350. They're going to drop to $130. So
Well-
60% of the population will see a cut that is more than half of their current rate. It'll drop further to 120. Sorry, it drops to 140. It'll drop 129 in another year. So 60% of the population is going to be saying, a few more Starbucks a month, as Peter said.
Am I reading this incorrectly then? On tier 2, 600 people, it'll go from $354 per year to $1,407?
No, the tiers don't line up. Sorry, you're right. I should create a way to make that more apparent. Take a look here. Tier 2 in the old system goes to 12,000, tier 3 to 42,000, tier 2 in the new system goes to 30,000, tier 3 to 120,000 gallons. So a lot more people are falling into these tiers. It's basically all of these folks are going into this tier. And many of these folks are also ending up in this tier.
Steve, I think we
So-
need to find a more intuitive depiction. The information is there, but maybe
I'm
by
with it. Well, Ron,
distribution, like,
put on your
per
thinking
the
cap, 'cause
original tiering.
Yeah, I mean, one way might be just to stagger these so that,
Exactly. Yeah, the
know,
first
these people are
460
actually pouring
people
into
or
this.
this will become that, roughly speaking. Next 600, you can show some overlap if necessary. The next 670, the next 140 like this. Then I think it would be more intuitive.
really good catch. David, that's really helpful. Thank you. Nate?
Have we modeled what could potentially happen if, some of the higher users get wise and, turn off their sprinklers when it's raining out and they
Boy.
cut their, water bill by, their water consumption by, some significant percent, if they, we're losing a lot of that high end, obviously it's going to affect the lower tiers. So I'd be curious to see how much that, what that does to the overall distribution.
Nate, you are the best straight man of the day, maybe the week. Here it is. So currently, our system generates about $1.5 million average over the last 5 years. I created 2 conservation scenarios. Modest conservation means there'd be mostly the top users cutting back a little bit, not much, 25%. Significant conservation here is that everybody who would fall in the top tier drops down to the next tier, and that tier conserves 50%. And the folks who are in the middle start to pull in their summertime too. And that would drop our system to just over $1 million a year, which obviously is not tenable. You have to have higher rates to pay for the basic operating cost of the system. The target system looks like this. Gasp. $4.5 million at full even in the first iteration, about $2.5 to $3 million instead of 1.5. With conservation, it's engineered so that, you know, even under a what you'd call high elasticity of demand, people responding to the price pretty aggressively and quickly, it would still generate enough to cover the base operating cost of water division. Whereas, you know, out 12 or 18 months, we'd expect it to cover the current operating costs and generate about $1 million additional enterprise funds to be used in the water division.
Steve?
Yeah.
I'm just looking at this. Really, the phase-in process is going to determine our model curve. Because
Say some more about that.
yes, that's correct. You can't, it's very hard to kind of model this. You're just guessing at, making intelligent guesses, but guessing what the story is. But by phasing it in just a little bit at a time, as has been proposed here, you will be able to get points on your demand curve without high risk necessarily. So I mean, you've drawn something out here, but we'll know after July, but before January of 2024, if in fact those points are valid points, and if they aren't, well, we know the curve is moving in another direction and we can react accordingly.
Right, and as you keep reminding me, John, when we get those new water meters, we're going to have a level of, you know, granular, real-time, almost real-time data that's going to make it really much easier to figure out right at the account level what's happening. And I'm not saying as Big Brother, but if we want to help, somebody comes to us and says, you know, I'd really like to be a better citizen in conserving water. And, you know, I've got 5 acres of lawn, but I also have a lot of resources. What should I do? The combination of better data and a whole bunch of conservation strategies would really help such a person. I'm hoping we'll get more than a few of those folks. Jeff?
Is the 1.49 million, is that just water revenue or is that water and sewer? Okay, so
It's just water.
So the 2.57 there on the right is just water also.
Right.
If those people have reduced their water usage greatly, their sewer revenue, for those who have sewer, their sewer revenue is going to go way down.
Yeah, that's one of the things I haven't put into the model, but it's a very legitimate concern. Would we need to predict the need to raise sewer rates? Because the sewer system enterprise fund operates the same way. It takes the basic operating costs. And I don't know the exacts, but Nate can fill us in. I don't think it builds a
Yeah.
reserve fund for
I mean,
amortizing capital.
basically Chuck and Nate's budget or revenue is not 1.49 million. It's that plus sewer. So we got to be careful that we're still not cutting
Oh, yeah,
them.
plus roads, plus buildings, plus lights, plus, you know,
Um,
all the rest of public works.
So Nate, do you consider, or maybe it doesn't work that way, that the water and sewer revenue doesn't go toward water and sewer necessarily?
They're separate accounts. They're separate enterprise accounts.
Yep.
Enterprise accounts.
Yeah, we just have to be careful that if
Yeah.
we have significant conservation, that we've also modeled the sewer rates, if they're going down and we actually,
Yeah, coincidentally, they happen to have very similar numbers, but they are separate.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a good point. This is the detail in that last vote of the select board. So that they have to state a policy. The policy is summarized by saying 100% of the operational cost for sewer and water is paid by the users. So if you don't have a sewer, you don't have to pay operational cost. That's different from capital cost, where 100% of bonded capital cost for water is paid by all the taxpayers, goes out as part of the property tax and other mechanisms. The sewer is divided 75-25 by policy. So, I wasn't addressing the sewer, but, we'd probably recommend amending this to say 100% of the annual cost of operations, source protection, and contaminant monitoring and remediation is paid by the users of the water system. The bonded capital cost is paid by the users and all taxpayers as determined annually by the Finance Committee. I put that in because if happily there's an extra $1 million, which isn't required to cover the operating, source protection, and monitoring and remediation costs, the Finance Committee could say, let's use it to quickly amortize the debt we have on account of our water system. Because believe me, when we have to go treat Lincoln Street well one way or another, we're going to have to borrow money to do that. Makes sense. This is so far we've got very little back from Raf Tellis, but this was what Dave Fox contributed today. He said, make sure that you pay attention to the policy statement for the enterprise fund so that you've provided. Otherwise, it's kind of like a nonprofit. It's not supposed to earn a big margin and call it reserves. It's not. It's designed to be a way of covering costs. So we redefine costs to allow ourselves to put conservation and contamination in there. Any other comments on this? I'd like to do at least a straw poll vote on whether this is worth taking forward to the select board or whether we should go back and amend the content. I can see where the Ron and other David are right that we should present this so it's clearer where the tiers fall compared to where they are today.
Wondering, is there any separation between residential and commercial in the rate structure?
There is, I've kind of ignored commercial because it's kind of a rounding error. In other words, of the water that is metered and isn't used by the town, 97% of it is used by residential users, 3% by commercial users. There happen to be a couple of big commercial users, the marinas, the athletic club, the county club, but I think they're already kind of in the crosshairs of conservation, or they will be when we go to implement this stuff. I mean, it'd be nice if we could get commercial up. That would be a sign that we're making use of broadening our tax base, et cetera. All the stuff that some of you guys have been working really hard to help the town with. But right now it's quite small. Helen, did you have a comment?
I mean, that could change in the coming years. Could become a more significant portion.
Yeah, and if you counted multifamily houses, that would probably add a couple percent right now. Not a lot, but if we build that 40B and put up any significant amount of affordable housing, those are going to add to I would call those commercial, although they're essentially residential use of the water.
Yeah, it'll certainly have to figure out how we handle some of the more, I guess, in-town multi-family, because a lot of those have just a single meter, for all of their units. That could disproportionately affect them.
Yeah, well, we'll find out quickly. If they get kicked into, tier 3, then, we aren't going to have to go to help them. They're going to come squawking to anybody who'll listen. You, Chuck, select board.
I think we could be proactive on that, Steve.
Yeah, I think so too.
Know who those folks are.
Why don't you just divide the usage by the number of units? And that's the tier they're in.
Common sense. Yeah. That might be the right way to do it. All right. Well, I guess the right thing to do here is to ask for a motion to approve taking these forward to the select board. And if that gets moved and seconded, we can have a final set of discussion about whether this is close enough for government work. I don't expect the select board to say, great, done at all. But, you know, it gives them something to shoot at. And the fact that it is a kind of a dramatic change, as David said, even though not for most of the users, it's a dramatic change in the rates. It'll probably occasion a lot of debate.
We're not going.
Question, Steve. This particular rate, rates that we have here, I know you briefly spoke with Dave Fox and discussed, well, these are the numbers that we're thinking about. And he said it sounds in general reasonable in some way. Did he?
No, he didn't say reasonable or unreasonable. He said, I don't think you're gonna get much change in usage, even when you do that. So
Okay.
he's sticking with the common sense and the little bit of academic literature I showed you that says
Okay.
people just aren't very responsive to the price of water, except under, you know, extreme conditions like.
All right. Here's where I'm going with that. The select board will ask questions. Well, who are you to propose these numbers? Why do you think these numbers are going to work? If the chart were run by Dave Fox and he just comes back with a note and says, here are my thoughts, something to the effect that you have said there, that's fine. He's in the business.
Exactly what I asked him. I said, you know, you don't need to read all of our prior work. Just take a look at this chart and tell me, is this crazy or not?
All right. Well, pending Dave's comment to more or less that effect, I would make a motion to submit this to the select board.
Thank you. Is there a second?
From Tom Keough.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? I like John's stipulation. Makes sense. It is possible that somebody else in his firm can step in because he's not the expert on this. That's their stock in trade is pricing and financing of water sewer systems.
Mm-hmm.
I may.
Okay, Ron, your hand is up still?
Are we voting this exact rate structure, or can we just vote the concept of that? Is it?
I propose that we vote this structure in order to tell the select board that, you know, unless the expert vetoes it, which I don't expect him to do, but we'll find out. With that, unless that happens, we'd like them to consider this. And I'll admit to all of you that, you know, this is likely to push some buttons, and that's part of the purpose, is to get some discussion about how high the rates can go for people who are using a lot of drinking water outdoors in particular.
And Steve, I also add, I mean, this not only lays out a rate level, but it also lays out the way it's going to be phased in. And that's not to say that after phase 1 or phase 2 or whatever, you say, we're learning some things here and we want to change something. But at least this says this is where the rates are going in the absence of any further data, which we will be able to collect because we will have a few smart meters going during the, at least during this pilot phase, during the first phase of this program. Would that be correct, Nate? Where are we on that?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, where are we on the pilot, the pilots? We've got, I think, one quote in. Have we got another one in, or?
I know Chuck was going back and forth with them prior to going out. To be honest, he was running with that a little more than I was paying attention to. Just one of those things that he was tending to handle. I can follow up with them. tomorrow.
Okay, all right. All right, because this would be happening at about the time that we would be starting some pilots with these folks.
And no pressure, Nate, but is he expected back next week?
At some point, I think, later in the week,
Okay,
seeing how things go.
yeah, family first, I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah,
Earlier this week on Monday night, he said, good luck, when we were presenting to select board. He said, good luck, chaos in the house tonight. So,
Yeah, I think John's
Yeah.
point though is well taken, because the rate impact is gradual over time. So
Yeah,
the first one is minor. So if we say,
Yeah.
listen, first one, we'll look at it again. Maybe we'll go forward, maybe we won't. I don't think that's the easier case to sell, I think.
right. Essentially, the top rates, which are, $8.50 to $9.50 are going to $20. So they're doubling. This tier, which is around 8, is going to 15, so it's doubling. This tier is only going up, 20-30%. This tier is going down. So it's a much more significant shift than they've ever made. But it's not impacting, except in a positive sense, the majority of users. And B, our expectation is there's not going to be a lot of behavior change in the short term, meaning in the first 6-12 months from it. Okay, can I ask for a roll call vote here or a show of hands? Let's do a show of hands for actual members. All those in favor of taking this forward, assuming no obstacles from Raftellus. I see Jeff, John, Tom, Ron, Jessica, Peter, Helen. That does it. Thank you. All those opposed? I see no hands. So I declare it unanimous. Thank you all very much. It's past 8, and I know the Celtics have tipped off or will in a moment. So I'm just going to give you a taste of the findings from the first 185 survey responses. They're actually kind of relevant to what we just talked about. So they got a couple things right. I said, tell me, compared to similar towns nearby, how are our water mains? People said they're either older and in worse shape or much older and in much worse shape. Although there's a significant 1/3 almost who don't know. But that's essentially the news in the cricket, the proclamations from Greg and Chuck and you, Nate, have sunken in.
How
I
many,
think the same,
how many people submitted responses, Steve?
it's 185 right now, Jeff. I'd like to get twice that, but I'm not sure exactly how to stir the pot. But, tell your friends if they haven't done it already. It really only does. Even if you do it slowly, it takes less than 10 minutes. Compared to similar towns nearby, average household in Manchester uses somewhat more or much more. That's, mostly right also, although again, a quarter don't know and a third think it's about the same. Nobody thinks it's less. Summer usage, got that mostly right also. Our summer usage increases more than most towns, or much more than most towns. Though again, there's a quarter who don't know. Where you begin to see real division is the basic question. We have plenty of safe, clean drinking water for the next 10 years at least. This is not a complete bell curve, but it's pretty close in statistical terms, meaning it's leaning toward the not, but clearly divided. This one's divided and leaning more toward the not. This is without restrictions. We'd have plenty of water during droughts. People are doubtful about that, which is good. That's probably one of the reasons we got conservation reactions. Now, I should say, I don't know who these 185 people are mostly. And the only information we asked about them was age. which looks fairly representative for Manchester, but that doesn't mean much. And what they think they pay for water and sewer. So I can't say what kind of audience this is, but the sense I get from their open-ended comments, about 30 of them gave comments, is that they're pretty engaged in safe water. They're probably more informed than normal. People don't know what their water rates are. So the plurality, 45% said, I don't know. The next most frequent, more than a third said, oh, they must be about the same as everybody else. And a few had some opinions about them being lower or higher, but we just don't know. And I think in one sense, the opportunity for the select board here is to, do some citizen education at the time that they do the.
And what are they actually? I forget. Are ours lower?
Ours are in the middle. Low compared to the people who've really put the pedal down, like Ipswich in the summertime. Higher than a few, particularly the big systems, MWRA and Salem Beverly are lower than us. And then there's every flavor. There's flat rate systems around us. You pay 1/3 of a cent for your water, no matter how much you use whenever. And then there's some very sophisticated ones like Ipswich, seasonal rate changes. Other stuff, this is the distribution of how much you paid for town water and sewer. I'm not exactly sure what to make of it. We have a small fraction and we're up in the fairly significant level. I think if I remember right, sewer is about 3 times or almost 3 times water. So these would be people who are paying, $800, $1,000 for water.
That's not managed.
This profile makes them look like they're pretty savvy. More than half say I have a basic water filter to remove sediment and dirt and bacteria. Third say I have an advanced water filter like a reverse osmosis or GAC. 90% say I pay attention to indoor conservation, like toilet, shower, dishwasher, washing machine. And half say I conserve water outdoors with rain barrels or drip irrigation. I'd like to believe that's reflects our population, but I just don't think it does. 3/4 want to improve their in-home filtering. 2/3 want to do more to conserve. And then, as I said, there's just a host of these comments. I'll send you folks these so you can read them. They're all over the map. But one of the common complaints is that the water looks funny, smells funny, tastes funny, and lacks pressure. So, and you have wonderful juxtapositions like I have no complaints and don't drink it. Yeah. Anyway, it makes you feel like people are paying attention to you on the task force, which is good. Okay, that's all I've got here. Stop that. And come back online. Good. So that's takes care of 4 agenda items kind of in one fell swoop. Are there any other updates from working groups? I know there was a little bit of discussion. I participated in some of it about Greg Fetishbill's article last week about PFAS in the cricket. And I should report that as a result of that discussion, I wrote Greg a note suggesting that we'd like to help build on what he's done, which is kind of introduce the subject and be, to my mind, pretty reassuring to people about things being under control and safe. And I don't want to be an alarmist, but I think even from the survey, we can see that there are other questions. One of them is, what should I be doing in my house while you guys figure out what to do with the Lincoln Street water? You know, let's assume it's not perfectly safe today, or otherwise we wouldn't have all this controversy. Do I need to go buy $1,000 filter system? And we should help Greg make an answer to that one, that kind of stuff. So I'll let you know what he says about that. Any comments on the minutes from our last meeting, April 12th? If not, could I hear a motion to approve them?
I'll move that we approve the minutes of the April 12th Water Resource Protection Task Force meeting.
Thank you.
And
A
I'll
second?
second that.
Moved and seconded. Any objection to approving the April 12th minutes? Please indicate your objection. Hearing none, they are approved. Now we need to set a date for a next meeting, which following our custom would be May 24. Anybody who's got a calendar, take a peek and see if that bumps up against anything.
Steve, that may not work for me, but that's, you know, it's I mean, if you eliminate a date because one person can't make it, then it doesn't make any sense, because you'll never come up with a date for a meeting.
Other people, I'm hearing no objections. All right, let's set it for 7 p.m. May 24th. And one more quick look at the agenda. Any other items not reasonably anticipated? All right, then. Thanks for your time tonight, and I'll entertain the motion everyone wants to hear.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Ms. Lamont. Seconded,
Second,
and without objection, I consider it approved. Thanks, everybody.
thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Good meeting.
Thank you,
You too.
Steve.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
Yep.